They say every stretch of highway has its ghosts, but on Interstate 94, it isn't the dead you should fear, it's the one who collects them. Last seen pulling over stranded drivers, and none were ever found again. When the lights go out and the world falls quiet, that's when the stories begin. You're listening to Nightling. Spent 11 years as a deputy sheriff in rural North Dakota before that night on Interstate 94. Most people don't realize how dark and empty those stretches of interstate get after midnight. Miles and miles of nothing but asphalt cutting through flat prairie with maybe one car passing every half hour. I was working the graveyard shift that November, just me and my partner covering about 180 miles of highway and a small town scattered between them. The dispatcher, Linda, was a 58-year-old woman who'd been there since the department opened, and she had this way of keeping her voice completely calm no matter what came through those phones. But around 1:45 a.m. that Friday, even Linda sounded rattled when she patched through the first call. A trucker heading east had called 911 saying he heard a woman screaming somewhere near mile marker 112. Said it sounded like she was being murdered right there on the shoulder. By the time I got there 14 minutes later, I found his rig pulled over with the engine still rumbling, driver door hanging open, and no sign of him anywhere. The cab still smelled like fresh coffee and cigarettes, and his logbook was open on the passenger seat with an entry half finished. The pen had rolled onto the floor. I called out for him, swept my flashlight across the tall grass on both sides of the road, but there was nothing. Just the endless chirping of crickets and the distant hum of power lines. His wallet was still in the center console, $240 in cash untouched, and his cell phone was on the dashboard showing the 911 call still connected. I radioed Linda to check if the trucker had called back or if another unit had picked him up somewhere, but she said the line just went dead after he'd reported his location. While I was processing the scene, she got another call, this time from a woman in a sedan about 3 miles west. Same story. Horrible screaming coming from the roadside. Sounded like someone in agony. I told Linda to keep the woman on the line and floor it up there. But when I arrived 9 minutes later, I found another abandoned vehicle, a silver Hyundai with the engine running, purse still on the seat, driver's door wide open to the night. The pattern was too specific to ignore. Both vehicles found with doors open, engines running, personal belongings untouched, and both drivers had called about hearing screams before vanishing. I started documenting everything while waiting for backup, taking photos of the Hyundai's interior, noting that her coffee was still warm in the cup holder, her phone showing a call to her husband at 12:14 a.m., probably letting him know she was on her way home. That's when Linda's voice crackled through my radio again. And this time she was talking fast, saying she had a teenage girl on the line who was pulled over near mile marker 118, crying and begging for help. The girl kept saying, "He's walking toward my car," over and over. And then Linda played the audio for me through the radio. I could hear this kid, couldn't have been older than 17, sobbing and saying, "Please don't let him take me. He already took the others. I saw him put them in the..." And then nothing, just the sound of wind and static. Linda tried calling back, but got no response. I was only 5 miles from mile marker 118, so I hit the sirens and pushed my cruiser up to 95, calling for immediate backup from state police and anyone else within 50 miles. The whole time I'm driving, I'm trying to piece together what's happening. 3 people reporting screams, 3 people disappearing within an hour, all along the same 20-mile stretch of highway. When I reached marker 118, I saw the car immediately. A beat-up Honda pulled onto the shoulder with its hazards still blinking. The driver door was open just like the others. But this time, I noticed something different. There were drag marks in the gravel leading away from the vehicle, like someone had been pulled across the ground. I followed them with my flashlight for about 25 feet before they just stopped right at the edge where the shoulder met the grass, as if whoever made them had been lifted up and carried from that point. My backup was still 18 minutes out when I made the decision to search the area on foot, keeping my radio open and updating Linda every few minutes. The grass along the highway was waist-high in most places, and as I pushed through it with my flashlight, I started noticing these weird indentations in the ground, like paths where something heavy had been dragged repeatedly over time. They all seemed to lead in the same direction, parallel to the highway, but about 60 yards from the road itself. That's when I heard it for the first time. A woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, definitely screaming, but something was wrong about it. The sound was coming from multiple directions at once, echoing in a way that didn't make sense for the open landscape. It would start from my left, then suddenly seem to come from behind me, then from straight ahead, like someone was circling me in the darkness while screaming. But the really disturbing part was that the scream never changed. Same pitch, same duration, same desperation, like a recording being played over and over. I drew my weapon and kept moving toward where the drag paths converged. And that's when I saw the van, a white commercial vehicle with no plates, parked in shallow ravine that would be completely invisible from the highway. The back doors were open, and I could see what looked like electronic equipment inside. Speakers and amplifiers, and some kind of control panel with dozens of switches and red LED lights blinking in sequence. The screaming was definitely coming from those speakers, looping every 45 seconds or so. And I realized this sick bastard had been using recorded screams to lure people off the road. But where were the victims? I called it into Linda, gave her the van's description and location, and started checking the surrounding area. About 15 feet from the van, partially hidden under a tarp and branches, I found what looked like a storm cellar door built into the ground. The kind you'd see on old farmsteads, except this was in the middle of nowhere with no structures around for miles. The metal handle on the cellar door was worn smooth from use, and fresh dirt had been scattered around it like someone had opened it recently. I could hear muffled sounds coming from below, not screaming, but movement, maybe voices. I radioed my exact coordinates to Linda and told her to redirect all backup to my location immediately, that I'd found something underground and needed the tactical team. She said the state police were still 11 minutes away, and I had to make a choice: wait for backup and risk losing whoever was down there, or go in alone. The sounds from below were getting more urgent, like someone banging on metal. And I kept thinking about that teenage girl who'd called 35 minutes ago, begging not to be taken. I positioned myself to the side of the door, yanked it open, and immediately the smell hit me. Dampness mixed with motor oil and something else, something chemical like chloroform or ether. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, and I could see light flickering at the bottom, shadows moving across the walls. I announced myself as law enforcement and started down those stairs. Each step echoed in what sounded like a much larger space than I expected. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a room about the size of a double garage, lit by a single work light hanging from the ceiling. Against the far wall, I saw them. 5 people sitting on the floor with their hands zip-tied behind their backs and duct tape over their mouths, including the teenage girl from the Honda and the truck driver from the first call. They were all awake, eyes wide with terror, frantically nodding toward the corner of the room I couldn't see from my position. I swept my gun in that direction and saw him. A man in his 40s, average height, wearing stained coveralls and holding a syringe in one hand. He had this perfectly calm expression like he'd been expecting me. And behind him was a tunnel entrance carved into the dirt wall, probably leading to another exit somewhere. He didn't run or attack, just set the syringe down carefully on a metal table covered with more zip ties, rolls of tape, and bottles of what looked like sedatives. "You're earlier than I expected," he said, his voice completely casual, like we were discussing the weather. "Usually takes at least 2 hours before anyone checks the vehicles properly. Small county departments, you understand." He took a step backward toward the tunnel, keeping his hands visible but moving with practiced confidence. And that's when I noticed the timer on the table, a digital display counting down from 3 minutes in 12 seconds. That's connected to the ventilation system, he explained, gesturing with his chin towards some PVC pipes running along the ceiling. When it hits 0, this room fills with carbon monoxide from a generator I've got running about 100 feet through that tunnel. You can try to get them all out, or you can come after me, but you definitely can't do both. The victims started making muffled, screaming sounds through their gags, thrashing against their restraints. I could see the pure panic in their eyes as they understood what he was saying. He backed into the tunnel entrance and added, "Oh," and cutting their zip ties takes about 30 seconds per person if you're careful not to slice their wrists. Math's not in your favor, deputy. He disappeared into the tunnel, and I had to make the fastest decision of my career. I ran to the victims, pulling out my knife and starting with the teenage girl since she was closest. The zip ties were the heavy-duty kind, multiple loops around each wrist, and he was right. It took me nearly 40 seconds to free her. Hands without cutting her. She immediately ripped the tape off her mouth and started sobbing that there were others, that he'd been taking people for weeks and moving them through the tunnels to different locations. 2 minutes left on the timer. I managed to cut the trucker free and handed him my knife, telling him to free the others while I tried to find the ventilation controls. The PVC pipes all led to a junction box near the stairs, but it was welded shut, no way to access it quickly. The girl was helping tear tape off the others' mouths, and one of them, a woman in business clothes, gasped out that she'd seen him reset the timer earlier. The code was pound 473, pound on the keypad next to the display. 45 seconds left. I punched in the code while the trucker was still cutting the last person free, and the timer stopped at 32 seconds. The red digits frozen, but still glowing in that dim light. The relief lasted maybe 2 seconds before we heard the rumbling from the tunnel. He was collapsing it from the other side, and dust started pouring into the room. We scrambled up those stairs so fast that the teenage girl tripped, and I had to carry her the rest of the way. Everyone coughing and choking on the dirt, filling the air. When we burst out into the night, my backup was just arriving. 3 state police cars and 2 ambulances screaming down from the highway. I pointed half of them toward where I estimated the tunnel would exit, probably another ravine or hidden spot. While the EMTs started checking the victims, the girl grabbed my arm and told me there was something else I needed to know. She'd heard him on a radio earlier talking to someone he called Dispatch, giving updates on the collections, which meant he wasn't working alone. Within 3 hours, we had 35 officers combing every inch of that highway corridor, and they found 2 more underground chambers, both empty but recently used with the same setup of restraints and sedatives. The tunnel system connected all 3 sites, roughly 2 miles of hand-dug passages that must have taken years to complete. We never caught him that night. He had ATVs stashed at 2 exit points, and by the time our helicopters arrived, he'd vanished into the wilderness. But here's what still haunts me. When the FBI tech team analyzed the audio equipment in his van, they found over 180 different recorded screams, each one labeled with a date and location going back 7 years across 5 different states. The investigation revealed he was part of a network, guys who call themselves collectors, who would grab people off remote highways and trade them like inventory. We rescued 14 more victims over the next month following leads from that night, but he personally was never found. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, and I hear a strange sound off the highway, I wonder if he's out there somewhere setting up another trap, playing another recorded scream to lure someone into the darkness. "7 months have passed since that night on Brookfield Lane, and I still can't drive past that neighborhood without feeling my chest tighten. I'm Officer Rachel Monroe, been with the Lakeside Police Department for about 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything our quiet town could throw at me. Domestic calls were routine for me. I'd handled dozens, maybe hundreds. Most were verbal disputes that needed cooling down. Some required arrests, but they all followed a predictable pattern. That Wednesday night, in early March started like any other swing shift. I was parked near the Maplewood Shopping Center, finishing paperwork from a minor theft report when dispatch crackled through about a disturbance at 4279 Brookfield Lane. The neighbors, an elderly couple named the Morizes, had called about violent arguing and what sounded like furniture being thrown around next door. The drive to Brookfield Lane took maybe 6 minutes, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked under the streetlights. It was one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions built in the late 90s, all two-story colonials with attached garages and perfectly manicured lawns. Number 4279 stood out immediately, though. Every light in the house was blazing, even the porch lights and what looked like the basement windows. But there was no movement visible through any of the windows, no shadows passing by, nothing. The silence hit me as soon as I stepped out of my patrol car. After a reported violent argument, you expect to hear something, continued shouting, crying, maybe a TV turned up to cover the awkwardness. But this house was dead quiet, and all those lights burning made it feel like the place was holding its breath, waiting for something. I radioed my position to dispatch and approached the front door, noting the pristine welcome mat that read, "Bless this home," in cursive letters. The door was slightly ajar, maybe 3 inches open, and through the gap, I could see into the foyer. A ceramic vase lay shattered across the hardwood floor, dirt and wilted daisies scattered among the pieces. I announced myself loudly. "Police, is anyone home? I'm coming to check on your welfare." Then I pushed the door open wider with my shoulder. The smell hit me immediately, copper and bleach mixing together in a way that made my sinuses burn. In my 8 years on the force, I'd learned that smell meant someone had tried to clean up blood. And recently, the living room to my right looked like a tornado had passed through. The coffee table was flipped, its glass top spiderwebbed with cracks, and the beige couch had been shoved hard against the wall, leaving deep scratches across the floor. Dark red droplets led from the living room toward the kitchen, getting thicker as I followed them. In the kitchen, I found a pool of blood near the island counter, maybe 8 inches across. Still tacky, but not fresh. Probably 2 or 3 hours old based on the consistency. Cabinet doors hung open, dishes scattered across the counters like someone had been searching frantically for something. But what really made me draw my weapon was the basement door. It had been padlocked from the outside with a heavy-duty master lock, the kind you'd use on a storage unit. But someone had taken a hammer to it. The tool was still lying on the floor, and the lock hung twisted and broken from the hasp. Fresh scratches covered the door frame around the lock, deep gouges that revealed raw wood underneath. Whoever had been trying to get through that door had been desperate. I called for backup before descending those stairs, told dispatch I had signs of violence and needed another unit immediately. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, and that chemical bleach smell grew stronger with each step. What I found at the bottom made me stop breathing for a moment. The basement had been converted into some kind of living space, but not the cozy rec room kind you'd expect in suburbia. A stained mattress sat in the corner on the concrete floor, still bearing the indent of a body. Next to it, a bucket that I didn't want to examine too closely, and a pile of women's clothing folded neatly on a plastic chair. But the worst part was the wall. Someone had drilled industrial-grade eye bolts into the concrete, 4 of them at different heights with heavy chains still attached. The chains had blood on the cuffs, along with what looked like pieces of skin where someone had struggled against them for a long time. On a workbench against the far wall, I found what made this whole scene click into place. There were 3 driver's licenses, all different women, all from different states: Indiana, Wisconsin, and Missouri. Next to them sat a notebook filled with schedules, times, and observations written in neat handwriting. Subject 3 refuses meals days 1 to 3. Subject 2 attempted communication with Subject 3, separated immediately. New acquisition plan for next week. Blonde, early 20s, spotted at a campus library. My radio crackled with backup arriving, but I was already photographing everything with my phone, knowing how crucial every detail would be. The most recent entry was from that morning. Subject 3 broke during night. Unusual strength display. May need to terminate ahead of schedule. Below that, in different handwriting, shaky and barely legible, someone had written, "He's upstairs. Get out. Get out now." The floorboards above me creaked, and every muscle in my body went rigid. I hadn't cleared the second floor. In my rush to follow the blood trail and investigate the basement, I'd violated basic protocol. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, moving from directly above toward the stairs. My backup was outside, probably just entering the house, but they didn't know someone was still here. I key my radio as quietly as possible. Suspect still in house. Second floor. Approach with extreme caution. The footsteps stopped, then came running, heavy boots pounding across the floor above, heading toward the back of the house. I bolted up the basement stairs, taking them 2 at a time, just as I heard glass shatter somewhere upstairs. By the time I reached the second floor with 2 other officers behind me, we found a bedroom window completely smashed out, curtains billowing in the night air. The bedroom told another part of the story. Men's clothes filled the closet, all organized by color. The dresser held a collection of watches, rings, and wallets, trophies I realized for victims' boyfriends or husbands. On the nightstand sat a police scanner, still turned on, and a laptop that was open to a University of Wisconsin student directory. But the detail that haunts me most was the wall behind the bed. He'd covered it with printed photos from social media. Dozens of young women at coffee shops, libraries, grocery stores, all taken from a distance, all unaware they were being photographed. Each photo had notes written in red marker. Too public. Lies with roommates. Perfect isolated jogging route. Parents visit monthly. Some photos had large X's drawn through them. Checking later, we found those women matched missing persons reports from surrounding counties. The one marked Subject 4. Next week showed a young brunette studying at a cafe. Her car keys visible on the table with a distinctive pom-pom keychain. We set up a perimeter immediately. K9 units tracking from the broken window. But the bastard had planned even his escape route. He'd left a rope ladder attached to the window frame, leading down to a shed roof, and then to a fence that backed up to a wooded area behind the subdivision. The dogs lost his scent at a creek about a quarter-mile in, where we found tire tracks from what looked like an ATV he'd stashed there. Inside the shed, we discovered he'd been preparing for this possibility. Bags of clothes, cash, hair dye, and 3 sets of fake IDs with his photo, but different names. Ryan Hale, Derek Collier, and Matthew Cross. We had no idea which, if any, was real. What we did know was that he'd been operating for at least 18 months based on the earliest dated photos, and the 3 women whose IDs we found were just his most recent victims. The forensics team worked through the night, and by morning we identified the blood in the kitchen as belonging to Caroline Myers, the woman from Indiana whose license we'd found. The other 2 were Hannah Wolf from Wisconsin and Emily Dorn from Missouri. Here's what we pieced together. Caroline, based on the blood volume and the desperate message, had somehow gotten free while he was out. She'd broken the basement door lock from the inside. We found her blood on the hammer handle and tried to help the others escape. But he came home before they could all get out. The neighbors heard the struggle. Furniture crashing as Caroline fought back with a desperation that gave her that unusual strength. He noted she wounded him too. We found his blood mixed with hers on a kitchen knife left in the sink. The other 2 women had gotten out during the chaos, running barefoot through backyards until they reached a house 6 blocks away, where they pounded on doors until someone let them in and called 911. Caroline never made it out. We found her body 2 days later, buried under fresh concrete in the garage of another house he'd been renting under one of his fake names 3 towns over. The coroner said she'd fought until the very end, defensive wounds covering her arms, his DNA under her fingernails. She'd saved 2 lives with her courage, creating enough chaos for Hannah and Emily to escape while she held him off. The house on Brookfield Lane turned out to be just one of 3 properties he was using. The second was that garage, and the third was a cabin up near the Pine Ridge State Forest, where he'd been taking victims initially before moving them to the suburban basement. Each location showed the same meticulous planning, the same horrifying attention to detail. We found journals dating back 3 years documenting his research and methods, how he'd studied police response times, neighborhood patterns, even attended community watch meetings to blend in. Hannah and Emily spent weeks in the hospital recovering physically and mentally. Their testimony finally gave us a real profile of him. Mid-30s, around 6 feet tall, brown hair, neat appearance, slight southern accent he tried to hide. He knew law enforcement procedures, possibly former military or police based on his methods. The FBI took over after we found evidence he'd operated in at least 4 other states. They still send updates occasionally, sightings that never pan out. Sometimes I drive past that house on Brookfield Lane. It's been sold now, renovated completely. A young family lives there with no idea what happened in their basement. But I know. Hannah and Emily know. And somewhere out there, he knows too. Probably watching another coffee shop, taking more photos, making more lists. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what I found in that house, but knowing he's still out there, planning to do it all over again. Oregon nights in September get cold fast. And that Friday, the temperature had already dropped close to freezing by the time I clocked in for my shift at the 911 dispatch center in Redwood Hollow, a quiet mountain town surrounded by dense fir forests and fog that never seemed to lift. 8 years I'd been answering emergency calls. The job had become part of my DNA. The hum of computer monitors, the soft static of open radio lines, and that constant awareness that at any moment, someone's worst night might come through my headset. The dispatch center sat in the basement of the county sheriff's office. No windows, just humming fluorescent lights that turned everything pale and artificial. My coffee had gone cold within minutes, but Friday nights were usually busy enough to forget about it. 2 other dispatchers worked beside me, Tracy handling fire and medical calls, and Mark on highway patrol. The clock showed 10:45 p.m. when I stretched my arms, cracked my knuckles, and reached for that stale cup of coffee. At 10:47, the call came through that changed everything I understood about fear. The red light blinked. I answered, and what I heard first was breathing, rapid, shaky, like someone trying not to make sound. Then came a whisper, so quiet my brain needed a second to process the words. Someone's in my house. The caller identified himself as Evan Miles, address 1429 Redwood Hollow Road. His voice trembled, the words coming out strained and broken, as if any sound above a whisper might get him killed. Through the phone, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, distant but deliberate, the sound of someone moving slowly, trying not to be heard. Evan told me he was locked in his upstairs bathroom, sitting inside the tub, the shower curtain pulled closed, phone pressed tight to his ear. His wife, Laura, and 15-year-old son, Caleb, were supposed to be in their bedrooms, but he hadn't heard from them since he woke to breaking glass 5 minutes earlier. Typed rapid notes while keeping my voice calm and professional, dispatching deputies immediately. But then Evan whispered something that froze me. They're not stealing anything. They're checking rooms. They're looking for us. I dispatched Deputy Marcus Hayes and Deputy Lynn Rivera, already racing down the fog-slick roads toward Redwood Hollow Road with lights off to avoid alerting whoever was inside. The house came up on my monitor, a 2-story colonial built in 1986, tucked between thick pine stands. No prior criminal calls. Just one medical emergency 2 years ago when Laura had slipped on the porch steps. Then, through the line, came the sound of footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, heavy. Evan's breathing hitched as he whispered that there were at least 2 intruders, maybe more. And then, the sound of a door opening down the hall. His son's room. He stopped talking. I could hear only his breathing. 10 seconds of silence that felt like hours. Then, softly, they're in Caleb's room. I can hear them talking, but the voices weren't raised. No screaming, no arguing, just low, calm conversation like people discussing something quietly. Evan wanted to run. I kept him on the line, begging him to stay put. Deputies were 2 minutes away. Then everything changed again. The voices stopped. Footsteps hurried back downstairs. A door clicked shut. Evan waited half a minute, then carefully opened the bathroom door. I could hear his bare feet on the carpet as he crept toward Caleb's room. He pushed the door open and exhaled this horrible, hollow sound, like all the air leaving his body at once. The room was empty. Bed neatly made. Window locked from the inside. No Caleb. He started shouting his wife's name, running to the master bedroom. Silence again. Laura was gone too. Her reading glasses sat beside an open book, the pages still flat, like she'd just paused mid-chapter. In the bathroom, her face cream jar was open, cotton pad on the counter. Interrupted mid-routine. Evan kept whispering, "It's impossible. They couldn't have left without me hearing." Deputies were less than a minute away. He searched the hallway, the guest room, the office, nothing. Every room showed signs of life just minutes ago. A steaming mug, a phone charger, a sweater tossed over a chair, but no people. Then Evan said something that made every dispatcher in the room freeze. "Wait, I can see the patrol car outside, but the kitchen door downstairs just opened again. Someone's coming back in." I relayed this instantly. Deputy Hayes confirmed they were still outside, observing the house. No movement visible. Evan's breathing turned panicked. He whispered that heavy boots were crossing the kitchen floor, moving toward stairs. But the deputies swore no one had entered. 2 realities, one on my phone, one on the radio, clashed in real time. Then Evan's voice just stopped. The line stayed open, but the only sound was breathing. Slow, steady, too calm to be his. Deputies breached the door seconds later. The sound of splintering would echoed through my headset. And half a second later, I heard the same sound through Evan's phone line, like a recorded echo. Inside, everything was untouched. Kitchen locked from within. Dinner on the table, 3 plates, half-eaten spaghetti, a cup of tea still steaming. Upstairs, everything exactly as Evan had described, except no one was there. Then came the detail that destroyed me. They found Evan's phone on the counter, right beside that steaming cup of tea. The call had lasted 11 minutes, 34 seconds, and was still connected. Deputy Hayes picked it up and spoke into it, and I heard his voice clearly through my headset. But the breathing continued underneath it, faint, rhythmic, not his. Later, we learned the call came from the house's landline, except the landline had been disconnected for over 2 years. The physical phone was found in a storage box in the basement, dusty. Unplugged, no power source. Still, the call record showed it came from that number. 3 days later, investigators found 3 old cell phones hidden in the basement ceiling. Each contained a single video file time-stamped that same Friday night. The first, filmed from outside, through the kitchen window, showing the Miles family eating dinner. The second, inside Caleb's room, filmed from the closet, the door slightly ajar, watching him do homework. The third, from inside the upstairs bathroom, behind the shower curtain, recording the empty tub. All 3 videos ended at 10:58 p.m., the exact moment Evan's voice had cut out. Each ended with that same, wrong, deliberate breathing. The FBI took over the case within a week. Everyone involved signed NDAs. But before the case went silent, Deputy Hayes found one last thing. Behind the water heater, in a crawl space not listed on the blueprints, they discovered sleeping bags, food wrappers, and notebooks filled with detailed records of the family's routines. When they ate, slept, turned off lights. even notes about their breathing patterns at night. And the handwriting matched Evan's perfectly. 6 months worth of notes. But his coworkers swore he'd been at work every day. No one could explain it. The official report concluded the family left voluntarily, though no one could say how or why. The house burned down the following year in what they called an electrical fire. Sometimes I still drive past the empty lot where 1429 Redwood Hollow Road used to stand. And I swear the air feels different there, heavier like it remembers. Some cases aren't solved because they can't be. Because what happened doesn't fit into the world we think we know. And the Redwood Hollow disappearance is one of them. If you made it this far, you've felt the chill. Don't leave me alone in the dark. Hit like to keep the stories coming. Subscribe for more true horror that shouldn't exist. And turn on that bell icon so you'll know when the next nightmare begins. Because some stories don't end when the call goes quiet.